I need a boyfriend tomorrow. The coffee cup slipped from Emma's trembling hand and shattered across the restaurant floor just as she whispered the words that would change her life forever. I need a boyfriend tomorrow. She didn't know that someone powerful had heard every word. Someone who had walked into the restaurant that night carrying millions of dollars, a broken heart, and absolutely no intention of becoming part of a stranger's life. But by sunrise, the billionaire sitting quietly in the corner would make her an offer that sounded completely impossible. Emma Carter had spent the last 6 years learning how to survive without asking anyone for help. At 27, she worked double shifts as a waitress at the elegant Rosewood restaurant in downtown Manhattan. Her hands were often sore from carrying heavy trays, her feet hurt almost every night, and her tiny apartment was barely large enough for a bed, a table, and the old photograph of her mother that sat beside the window. Yet Emma never complained. She had learned early that life did not become easier simply because you were tired. That evening, the restaurant was packed with wealthy businessmen, celebrities, and couples celebrating anniversaries. Emma moved between tables with a polite smile, even though she had barely eaten all day. Her younger brother, Noah, was waiting at home with a fever, and Emma desperately needed the extra money from her late shift to buy his medicine. Their father had disappeared years earlier, and their mother had passed away after a long illness, leaving Emma with a 16-year-old brother and a mountain of responsibilities. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of one good person changing another person's life, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Your support helps stories like this reach people who may need a little light in a difficult moment. Emma had just finished serving a table when her phone vibrated in her apron. She glanced at the screen and froze. It was her aunt, the only relative who had helped them after their mother died. The message was short. She needed Emma to come home the next morning because there was something important they needed to discuss. Emma already knew what that meant. Her aunt had discovered that their father had left behind an unpaid debt connected to the family house. The deadline was tomorrow afternoon. If the money wasn't paid, they could lose the small home where Emma and Noah had grown up. Emma leaned against the kitchen wall, closing her eyes as panic tightened her chest. She had no savings. She had no wealthy friends. She had no inheritance. She had no one to call. And then her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from her former fiancé, Daniel. He was getting married. The wedding was tomorrow. Emma stared at the message for several seconds before a strange sadness settled over her. Daniel had left her 2 years earlier because he had decided she was too poor, too complicated, and too responsible for a younger brother. He had wanted a glamorous life. Emma had wanted someone who would stay when life became difficult. Apparently, neither of them had gotten what they wanted. But tomorrow was not only Daniel's wedding. It was also the day Emma had promised her aunt she would attend a meeting about the family house. And now she knew Daniel would be there. Her aunt had begged her not to come alone because Daniel's wealthy family was involved in the dispute over the property. Emma had no idea how that could be true, but she knew one thing: she could not walk into that room looking helpless. She wiped her eyes and returned to work. A few minutes later, she entered the small staff room, pulled out her phone, and called her best friend Lily. When Lily answered, Emma tried to laugh, but her voice broke. She explained everything. The house. The debt. Daniel's wedding. The meeting. The humiliation she expected tomorrow. Then, without thinking, Emma whispered, "I need a boyfriend tomorrow." There was silence. Lily asked if she was serious. Emma covered her face with both hands and admitted that she didn't need a real relationship. She just needed someone beside her so Daniel's family wouldn't look at her like a helpless woman who had nobody. She needed someone confident. Someone respectable. Someone who wouldn't judge her. She needed a temporary boyfriend for one day. Unfortunately, Lily had no suggestions. And neither of them noticed that the door to the staff room was slightly open. Outside stood a man in a dark charcoal suit. Alexander Reed. At 34, Alexander was one of the youngest billionaires in New York. His technology company had transformed him from a quiet software engineer into a man whose name appeared on magazine covers. Yet almost nobody knew that Alexander hated attention. He had come to Rosewood that night because his business partner had cancelled their dinner, and he had wanted to eat somewhere without reporters following him. He had overheard Emma's final sentence. "I need a boyfriend tomorrow." Normally, Alexander would have walked away. Instead, something about the sadness in her voice stopped him. He remembered what it felt like to need someone. 3 years earlier, Alexander had been engaged to a woman he loved deeply. She had died unexpectedly after a long illness, and since then he had buried himself in work. He had money, influence, houses in 3 countries, and more luxury than he could ever use. But when he went home at night, none of it mattered. The mansion was silent. His phone was full of business contacts. His heart was empty. When Emma returned to the dining room, she noticed the quiet man in the corner. Alexander was watching her. Their eyes met for a moment. Emma immediately looked away. She had no idea that the man sitting there could buy the entire restaurant without checking his bank account. She also had no idea that he had just decided to do something completely irrational. When Emma approached his table to collect the empty coffee cup, Alexander calmly asked if she had found the boyfriend she needed. Emma nearly dropped the tray. Her face turned bright red. She tried to explain that he had misunderstood. But Alexander simply smiled. He told her he wasn't interested in embarrassing her. He had overheard enough to understand that she was facing a difficult situation. Then he offered to help. Emma refused immediately. She didn't want charity. Alexander respected that. So instead of offering money, he made a different proposal. He would pretend to be her boyfriend for one day. Emma stared at him as though he had lost his mind. She asked why a billionaire-looking stranger would do something so ridiculous for a waitress he had never met. Alexander answered honestly. Because sometimes people needed someone to stand beside them, not because they were weak, but because they had been standing alone for too long. Emma didn't know what to say. After several minutes, she agreed. The next morning, Alexander arrived outside Emma's apartment in a black luxury car. Emma stepped outside wearing a simple blue dress that had belonged to her mother. She expected Alexander to look disappointed. Instead, he looked at her as though she were the most beautiful person he had seen in years. He offered his hand. Emma hesitated before taking it. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like the poor girl everyone pitied. She felt protected. The meeting was held in a private office belonging to Daniel's family. When Emma entered with Alexander beside her, the room went silent. Daniel's smile disappeared. His parents stared at Alexander. Daniel asked who he was. Emma looked at Alexander nervously. Alexander simply introduced himself as Emma's boyfriend. Daniel's expression changed instantly. But the real shock came when Daniel's father recognized Alexander. Everyone in the room knew him. The billionaire. The owner of Reed Technologies. The man whose company had recently purchased several major properties across the city. Daniel's father suddenly became polite. But Alexander wasn't there to intimidate anyone. He was there because Emma deserved a fair chance. The truth soon came out. Daniel's father had purchased the debt attached to Emma's family house, expecting to force Emma to sell the property cheaply. Daniel had known about it. Emma felt betrayed all over again. She looked at Daniel and asked how he could stand there knowing her family might lose their home. Daniel couldn't answer. Alexander quietly asked for the documents. After reviewing them, he discovered something even more disturbing. The debt had already been paid years earlier by Emma's mother through a legal settlement. Someone had falsified the records. The room erupted into chaos. Alexander immediately contacted his legal team. Within hours, the fraud was uncovered. Emma's family home was safe. But Alexander didn't stop there. He learned that Emma's mother had once worked as a nurse and had secretly helped families who couldn't afford medical care. She had kept a small notebook filled with the names of people she had helped. Alexander found the notebook in Emma's apartment. He read several pages and realized something. Emma had become exactly like her mother. She had spent years helping everyone around her while never asking anyone to help her. That night, Alexander returned to the restaurant. Emma was working again. He sat at the same table where they had first met. When her shift ended, he told her that he no longer wanted to pretend. Emma's heart stopped. She thought he was saying goodbye. Instead, Alexander admitted that the day they spent together had been the first day in years when he hadn't felt lonely. He didn't want a temporary girlfriend. He wanted to know the real Emma. He wanted to help her brother. He wanted to see her smile. Most importantly, he wanted to earn the right to stand beside her. Emma cried quietly. She told him she was afraid. Afraid that his wealth would eventually make him ashamed of her. Afraid that he would wake up one morning and realize she didn't belong in his world. Alexander took her hand and told her that money had never been what he was missing. He had spent years buying everything except the one thing money could never purchase. A home that felt warm. A person who cared whether he came home. A reason to stop being lonely. Emma smiled through her tears. Months later, Noah recovered completely and returned to school. Emma left the restaurant, but not because Alexander gave her money. Instead, Alexander helped her turn her mother's old notebook into something meaningful. Together, they created a small foundation that provided medical assistance to struggling families. Emma became its director. She finally discovered that the kindness she had spent her entire life giving away could become a future. A year after that first night, Alexander and Emma returned to Rosewood Restaurant. They sat at the same table. Emma laughed when she remembered the words that had started everything. She had once said she needed a boyfriend tomorrow. She never expected that the stranger who hurt her would become the man she would want beside her for the rest of her life. Alexander reached across the table and held her hand. He told her that sometimes the most unexpected moments become the turning points of our lives. Emma looked at him and smiled. She finally understood something her mother had once written in that little notebook. Kindness does not always return in the same form we give it. Sometimes we help a stranger today, and tomorrow, life sends someone to help us. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes that kindness still matters, and subscribe to Kindness Corner for more emotional stories about hope, love, and second chances. And before you go, leave a comment saying, "Kindness always finds its way back," if you believe that one small act of kindness can change an entire life. Because Emma went to work that night believing she had nobody. She walked out believing she needed a boyfriend for one day. But what she really needed was someone who would remind her that she was never meant to carry the whole world alone. And sometimes, the person who changes your life is the one who simply happens to hear you when you whisper, "I need someone."